I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority. It's July 20th and it's 7:04 p.m. So first of all, we have open forums. So Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you explain the process for that, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Supple. For the open forum, people can submit comments via email. They can email me at ldubois@richfieldmn.gov, or they can call 612-861-9764.
All right, and Mr. Stark, I just wanted to clarify, the open forum is for things that are not on the agenda, and
Yep, that is correct. The way the open forum works is for regular agenda items, we would address residents' comments or concerns during that agenda item. So there were a number of people that sent in comments about the development proposal at 64th and Lyndale, and we will be addressing those during that agenda item rather than during the open forum.
okay. And then to clarify one other thing, the phone number that you gave, can they call in right now, or was that they had to call in earlier?
I believe they can call in right now.
Okay, so there's like a 20-second delay usually.
So we only do the live call-ins for public hearings.
Okay,
We haven't been doing them for the open forum for the HRA yet.
okay, that was what I wanted to clarify, because I think there's a difference between what's happening at a public hearing and the open forum. So at this point, there was no one that emailed you or called you in advance for items that are not on the agenda, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Executive Director Stark is going to address the comments that were sent earlier to commission members when we get to those agenda items. So with that, we're going to move approval of the minutes of the regular HRA Authority meeting of June 15th, 2020.
So moved, Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez.
Is there a second?
Second, Commissioner Bruce Daniels.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez and seconded by Commissioner Vries Daniels to approve the minutes for June 15th, 2020. Is there any discussion, or are there any questions? Hearing none, Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you please take the roll?
Yes, Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Vries Daniels,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes.
Thank you. Next, we have, I don't see it on here, but I believe we need to approve the agenda. So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
So moved.
Commissioner Elliott.
All right, it was moved by Commissioner Elliott, and I'm not sure who seconded. Oh, Commissioner Sandel seconded. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please respond to Administrative Assistant Dubois when she takes the roll.
Thank you, Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Vries Daniels,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
Thank you. We have 5 ayes.
Thank you. Our next item is the consent agenda. Executive Director Stark.
Thank you, Chair Supple. So the consent calendar contains items which are acted upon in a summary fashion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and recommended actions have also been approved. We only have one consent agenda item for tonight, and that is the consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving the issuance of and providing the form, term, covenants, and directions for the issuance of its tax increment financing limited revenue note Series 2020 in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $8,492,000 related to the Tax Increment Financing District 2017-1, the Chamberlain. And I would just say that this is a commitment that the HRA made in prior actions. And that concludes the consent calendar.
I'll make the motion. I'm Commissioner Regan Gonzalez.
Second, Commissioner Elliott.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Gonzalez and seconded by Commissioner Elliott to approve the consent calendar. Mr. Stark, before we, can you explain, that is a pay-as-you-go note, correct?
Correct. And what that means is the developer in this case, they will continue paying real estate taxes on the base values that were there prior to their construction of new property. So all those base value taxes go to all the taxing jurisdictions that they always went to. The new taxes or tax increment, a portion of that is returned to the developer to reimburse them for qualified costs only when they pay their real estate taxes. And so, for example, if they were to not pay their real estate taxes for some reason, then they would not receive the pay-as-you-go note payment, but the HRA would not have any obligation to provide it to them. And so really, this is a way to put the developer at their own risk for their own benefit.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions for Executive Director Stark? All right, then Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you please take the roll?
Yes, Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott, Commissioner Regan Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Freeze Daniels,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
Thank you. We have 5 ayes.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to consideration of a resolution approving a contract for private development with 6345 LLC and authorizing the issuance of a tax increment limited revenue note. Executive.
Thank you, Chair Supple. On November 26th of last year, North Bay Companies presented a redevelopment concept at 64th Street and Lyndale Avenue to a combined work session of the Richfield HRA, Planning Commission, and City Council. The proposal called for the rehabilitation of the existing 22-unit apartment building located at 6345 Lyndale Avenue South, along with the construction of a new apartment building to the east. The existing apartment building is considered to be naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAH. Based on the positive feedback at the work session, the HRA approved a preliminary development agreement with North Bay on January 21st, 2020. The primary purpose of that preliminary agreement was for the developer to determine the financial viability of the proposal, and for the HRA and staff and financial consultants, Ellers, to quantify the potential public assistance available to cover any cost gap that the developer's feasibility analysis identified. The original preliminary development agreement was subsequently extended due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Since this preliminary agreement was approved by the HRA in January, the developer has pursued planning and zoning approvals that would be necessary for the development to occur. These efforts have included the 27th, when we could still have neighborhood meetings. As a result of neighborhood input, the easternmost portion of the building was reduced to 4 stories. The unit count was reduced by 8 units in an effort to increase the number of available parking spaces per unit. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on May 27th, 2020, and you'll note that that's a good span of time between February 27th and May 27th until that planning commission meeting occurred. And that is because the developer continued to put work into refining their proposal. While a majority of the site, the existing apartment building and 3 duplexes, has been properly zoned for higher intensity multifamily housing since 2014, one of the single family homes acquired for the project was still zoned for single family residential. Ultimately, a rezoning for planned mixed use was sought by the developer to accommodate the density they were proposing. While the Planning Commission had concerns about the parking and recommended that a stricter parking ratio be achieved, they did recommend the overall approval of the development with that caveat. After the Planning Commission meeting, the development team was able to add an additional 4 parking spaces by reconfiguring the parking lot. The City Council approved the rezoning and other land use applications on the site last Monday, July 14th. Both the HRA and the developer have now met all of the obligations in the preliminary development agreement. Since that's the case, HRA consideration of a contract for private development is now being sought. This contract was drafted by HRA legal counsel, Julie Eddington, and has been reviewed and edited by both the HRA staff and the developer. I'm going to go through some of the provisions of the contract. The developer will make improvements totaling at least $18.5 million to include construction of a new 4 to 5 story 82 unit apartment building and rehabilitation of the existing 22 unit NOAA apartment building. The developer will pay and/or reimburse the HRA's upfront costs to create this agreement, to establish a TIF district, and other upfront administrative costs. At least 20% of the units, including at least 5 in the new building, must be affordable to households with incomes of 50% or lower than the area median income for the life of the TIF district. The life of the TIF district could be as long as 26 years, or if the property were to inflate positively the values, the TIF district could be as short as 12 years. This level of affordability meets both the HRA and city's inclusionary housing policy, as well as the state's requirements for a housing TIF district. The HRA would withhold the first 10% of tax increment for reimbursement of its ongoing administrative costs, and the developer would receive the remainder of TIF generated to reimburse them for costs incurred to allow their development to achieve the affordability requirements. This is a housing TIF district, and with state statutes, that's really the rationale for being able to provide a developer TIF in a housing TIF district is to plug any financial gaps that allows the project then to become affordable. Without this level of assistance, it has been determined that this project could not be affordable. That's what's known as the but-for test. This project could not occur with this level of affordability, but for the precise level of increment that's being sought and proposed. The maximum TIF that would be available to the developer is $2,025,987. Staff and the HRA's financial analysts have concluded that, as I stated, the development could not occur but for this level of assistance. As a reminder, in a TIF district, the property owner continues to pay taxes on the pre-development property values to all the taxing jurisdictions, as had been the case prior to the establishment of a TIF district. The property owner also pays normal property taxes on the value of new construction, and it's these new taxes or the tax increment that can be returned to them. Sometimes there's a misnomer that TIF means that the developer is not paying taxes, or that the city is somehow giving of its own the TIF comes solely from the payment of taxes by the developer. The developer chose to buy an additional property at 514 64th Street West in order to increase their surface parking and to provide a park access from 65th Street to Garfield Park. This was done in part at the request of the city's Recreation Services Department, as they believe providing this access makes the park more usable and more safe. As a first, this is something that we've addressed. A number of new provisions have been added to this contract in order to help combat unfair labor practices. These provision includes construction and ongoing operation of the project must comply with all local, state, and federal labor laws. The certificate of completion will be provided upon evidence that all contractors, subcontractors, and laborers have been paid. If the developer fails to comply with labor laws, they will be in default of the contract, and if they are in default, the HRA can delay issuance of the tax increment, reduce the amount of TIF by 20%, or terminate the contract. As I stated at the open forum, we have had a number of people send in communications to the HRA on this topic. Administrative Assistant Dubois has forwarded all of those communications to you at least earlier today. You may have received some of them sooner than that. So we did receive 4 communications, one from Debbie Ng of 6334 Grand Avenue South, one from Kevin and Ruthann Musetter of 6335 Harriet Avenue South, one from Nancy Iverson of 508 West 64th Street, and one from Alex Asmus of 6401 Harriet Avenue South. And I just jotted down what I thought kind of were the main topics that they wanted to express. I think it's safe to say that all 4 residents were in opposition to the project. And their opposition was based on a concern that there's too high of a proportion of multifamily homes to single-family homes in this area. They're concerned about parking, particularly on-street parking and winter parking concerns. They're concerned about added traffic. They're concerns about building height, about the trail access to Garfield Park, and the appropriate use of tax increment financing. Since you've received those letters and reviewed them, I would just stand for any questions you might have that arose from those communications. And with that, I conclude the staff report.
Thank you. Are there any commissioners that have questions at this point?
If I may,
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Elliott.
John, it's my recollection when we were talking with the developers, Henley developers, we talked about the parking and there being somewhat of a shortage, at least in terms of what our normal requirements were. And we had a discussion about the fact that the target or the demographics about who wants a 400, 450 square foot apartment sometimes is indicative of the fact that they're young professionals and everything are more in tune with riding a bike, taking Metro Transit and everything. It sounds like that's been pretty much dispelled by both what we're seeing with the development of Henley on the other side of Lindale and what the neighbors are concerned about. I guess I wasn't aware of the fact that part and parcel of buying the apartment is you also had to pay for a parking space. And those that choose not to pay then are creating the problems on parking on the streets and a lot of the problems during the winter. I'm wondering if we've had a discussion with the developers about duplicating that same problem across the street, and if we're in a position to say that really is not working very well and you're going to have to come up with a better idea.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Elliott. A couple of things. One is they are meeting the city's parking requirements. The parking requirement states that it has to be 1.25 parking spaces per unit, but that they could achieve a 10% reduction if they are close to regular transit service. This is one of our best served transit corridors, so staff believes that the 10% reduction is appropriate. And so that would bring them down to a 1 ratio. And if Melissa Paleman is still on the meeting, I think she could state whether that's being achieved or not.
Good evening, commissioners. Yes, that rate is being achieved. And I will just add that at the Planning Commission, there was a little bit of worry about this parking ratio, which is why the Planning Commission recommended that we not grant this transit reduction. However, between that planning commission meeting and the city council, the developer provided a little bit of more information. Specifically, they talked about the size of the units, and some of these units are exceptionally small. They are rented by one person. They are not shared units. They went further to explain the larger units, which most of the time in their other developments and the developments across the street are also rented by one person, but with the available parking would achieve almost up to a 1.5 per bedroom ratio. So when you're considering the size and the breakdown of these particular units, we do feel that this is the right ratio for this project.
So I believe the developers on the line, and they can address this as well. You know, some of the concerns or statements that Commissioner Elliott made, you know, is kind of where I started from as well. Paid parking in Richfield is a new phenomenon. And so I had the very same question, you know, why have it the paid parking? And to some extent, it was to not saddle non-parkers or people that have only one car with the development cost required to provide more parking. And so therefore to have the cost borne by the tenants that are actually utilizing that. But again, I'll have the developer perhaps address that.
Is the developer on the line?
Garrett Duncan here, as the development analyst, is here. Daniel, are you here? Okay, he is not. So, yeah, that's kind of what the information that we sent over was to support that. And the added parking was obviously stemming from neighborhood complaint as well. But we've done what we can to really increase the parking and maximize the parking on the lot.
So I would like to follow up on that. I appreciate that you've added spaces to the lot because I think that's important, but we're getting reports from neighbors that they're watching people come out from the apartments in the morning and walk across the street to where they've parked overnight. So I have a question for the city. What would be the procedure if we would say they couldn't have overnight parking on that street, on 64th, or on one side of that street? Because there are safety concerns about the snow plowing and that kind of thing. And so what would be that procedure for the city to follow?
Yeah, so that kind of spills over from being a community development and development issue to a public safety and policing issue. And so I don't want to just answer off the cuff without checking with those folks. I know that they are very reticent to have specific parking requirements in specific parts of town, just from an enforcement standpoint. Yeah.
So part of the question is I did drive over in that area several times. And on the south side of the street, it does seem to always be parked up, but there's no parking currently on the north side of the street. Is there any indication that that would change so that there would be parking on both sides of the street at any point?
Commissioners, right now parking is restricted on the north side, which is why you don't see any parking there. We believe that the parking on the south side is primarily for convenience purposes, and it's the people that live in that plaza development. That said, we did think about what to do on the north side. One of the options that we considered was possibly getting rid of those parking restrictions there immediately adjacent to the development and keeping them adjacent to the single family homes, thereby allowing the people that or guests that may come to the apartments to park immediately in front of the apartments, but not farther into the neighborhood. We did discuss that briefly with Public Works. they said that that road is particularly narrow there. So they'd have to look at that more carefully. It did come up as a plowing issue. So it's something that they want to explore more. From a planning perspective, it does seem like a good idea to try to, if there is any spillover parking, put it immediately where it belongs, as opposed to letting it spill to the east. But that may not be an issue. The parking, as it's restricted now, where it's not allowed on the north side, might just have to stay. I don't anticipate getting rid of parking restrictions as a whole on that block, or recommending that at all.
All right, Commissioner Regan Gonzalez.
Thank you. I want to just say thank you to all the residents that sent us their letters and emails. I also read through all of them all, and then also drove into the area to see what they were talking about. And I would say my biggest concern was kind of the parking spillover into the neighborhood also, as Chair Supple just mentioned. So it sounds like we're talking internally about different ways what things we can use to address that issue, but that right now there's no specific ideas we have. What would the process be to say, here's what we could do and here's what we'll start with? Because I guess that was one of my biggest concerns, is the plowing and the parking in the neighborhood.
Commissioners, I would say that right now there is no proposal to change anything on that north side. Right now, it is restricted parking. So the process to change anything would involve talking with the neighborhood, talking with Public Works and Public Safety, going through an official process in that way.
I would just add that, with the Henley one across the street, in talking with the developer there's kind of a time period to let this kind of work through itself. For example, let's say that they had their parking set at $100 a month, and they have only 50% utilization. Well, then they know that they've got to adjust that number. And the development is so new that they haven't kind of equalized the demand for parking with what people are willing to pay for that. It's in their best interest financially and in terms of tenant relations, make sure that the underground parking there is utilized as fully as possible. And I think, as I said, they're still kind of tweaking that.
All right, Assistant Director Palin.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring up one more thing, which is something we briefly talked about in the work session prior to this meeting, and that is provision of affordable housing and how we do that and how the HRA contributes to that. And unbundling parking is a way to do that. Not everybody wants that car, and this is a way to make a unit more affordable for somebody who is going to take transit, is by not making them subsidize an expensive parking space for someone else. So that's not to say that there aren't concerns about spillover and that these aren't discussions that we should have, but it is another concern to think about. Even though this idea of paying for parking is new in Richfield, it is a way to make sure that the people who are using that parking and the people who aren't and don't need it are not.
All right, thank you. So just to clarify a couple things, you're saying right now there's no plans to get rid of the restriction for the parking on the north side because of the issue with the plowing, and the neighbors have brought up the same thing. And also, when Lindale and some of those things are updated at 65th, is there going to be on-street parking on Lindale in that area as well?
I don't think it's a known outcome, but that's the direction that it's been going.
Right. I would add that current plans do show on-street parking in this area on Lindale. Yes.
Okay, and then the timelines, that'll all be happening about the same time that this is being built, is that correct?
I don't recall the construction schedule. Do you, Melissa? I don't.
All right, are there other questions or comments that people have? All right, Commissioner Sandal? Commissioner Sandal, you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Am I on? Am I still muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. The only thing I haven't heard discussed was the letter with the resident whose property would be immediately adjacent to the access to the park from the south, going into Garfield Park. And I don't know how close, she says it's 10 feet. That sounds pretty close, but I don't know. I looked at her property, but I really couldn't see exactly. And I guess my suggestion would be, where possible, to move it as far from her house as we can. I do think, however, that it's legitimate to have a south entrance into that park so that the kids on the south end of the park don't have to walk all the way around to get into Garfield Park. If there are people in those buildings with kids.
Right. And so there's something called crime prevention through environmental design. And one of the tenets of CPED is that the more eyes that are on a park, the safer it is. The more accessible, the safer it is. And so this is a community park. As you stated, right now the access is very limited. So our Parks and Recreation folks felt strongly that this was the way to go. I'll let Melissa talk about the measurements there, but any additional landscaping that they would put in would be at the peril of parking spaces, I believe.
Yes, thank you. I was just pulling up the plans. Between the property line and the first parking stall is approximately 18 feet. And I don't have a direct measurement, perhaps the developer can remember, about what that is in terms of landscaping versus path. I think it is correct that it's about 10 feet, and it includes a completely opaque fence as well as heavy landscaping to separate that particular property from the path. And then a small buffer to allow for door swing for those parking stalls that are immediately adjacent to that. And that is correct that any larger buffer there would reduce parking on site.
Commissioner Sandal, did you want to say something else?
Just to comment, the Richfield League of Women Voters has picked Garfield Park for their twice a year cleanup. So we've been there many times. I've missed the last several, and there is a wonderful little park feature in there now that wasn't there when we used to clean it up. So congratulations to the city, and I hope the kids will enjoy using it.
I've also been thinking about the park, and I do think it makes it more user-friendly and safer to have the two entrances to it. And the problem with trying to move the entrance over is then you'd have kids walking through the parking lot to get to the park, and I don't think that is safe as well. I think as long as we have that landscaping there, that's a buffer between the path to the park and the property owner, I think that is appropriate to have it there. So I would support that part with the park. Other questions that people have? I did want to address the TIF issue that came up. You had mentioned, Executive Director Stark, that this is a housing TIF district. Can you reiterate that one more time?
Sure. In the letter, I think there was some questioning about whether the thinking was that TIF funds could only be used for physical improvements, such as infrastructure, buying land, or demolishing buildings. Just to true of a redevelopment TIF district. A redevelopment TIF district is there to eliminate substandard properties and to eliminate blight. This is not a redevelopment TIF district as it's being proposed. It's a housing TIF district. And the purpose of a housing TIF district is to close the financial gap that would hinder the ability to provide affordable housing. And so really that is how the funds are how the TIF funds would be used in this project, to reimburse the developer for development costs, which would include things like acquisition, so that the site is ultimately affordable. As I said, this came as the result of very detailed analysis by Ellers and by staff. And without this TIF, they would not be able to meet that affordability.
Thank you for that explanation. Are there other thoughts, questions, concerns? Commissioner Breeze Daniels?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate all the staff work on this, and I appreciate Assistant Director Pillman's comments about the cars and parking. Well, I agree, like the parking situation for the Henley one needs to be fixed. I really do appreciate the thought process of looking at something different to make this more affordable and having those people not pay for parking spots that don't have cars and use the world differently. So thank you.
Assistant Director Paleman, you mentioned that the people that had talked about that they may adjust their parking rates. Did they have some kind of a timeline of how long they thought before that would all flow into the, like, adjust itself and get figured out?
And actually, I think I'm the one that mentioned that. And so that
Thank you.
it's been some time since I had that conversation with them. It was probably 2 months ago. So I don't know where they're at. At that point in time, they had not had all their tenants move in yet, I believe. And so they felt like until all of the tenants moved in, they couldn't really get a good handle on the parking utilization rates. So again, I think I did see a lot of call-in users, or a couple of call-in users. We've had some technical difficulties. I'm wondering if Dan Oberpriller from North Bay isn't one of these call-in users, and he's just not been able to communicate. So I don't know if Dan, if you're there. Yeah, I suspect he's there.
In the last work session, we were able to have some people comment through chat. If he's there and would like to respond in the chat, we could read it to the people in the general public. Because I know in the last work session, a different developer did speak to the fact that if you don't have enough parking, you tend to exacerbate your turnover rate. So I think it's in the developer's best interest to have this work out as well. But I would like him to be able to speak for himself. So is there anybody on the team that's there?
Yeah, I can verify that that's what Dan's thoughts are per se, but I can't, I guess, go into too much detail just because I do work on the development side and not on the property management side of the business. I know that just broadly, we have the majority of our residents that have reported having vehicles are paying for parking spaces. And I think we've had very minimal, I can't say the exact number, but very few that are not paying for a parking space at all. It's just a few number of units of those. So that's kind of where we are with that investigation.
Are there any further questions, concerns, discussion points? All right, if not, if someone would like to make the motion, that would be in order at this point.
Right, approve a resolution for contract for private development with 6345 Partners LLC and authorizing the issuance of a tax increment limited revenue note.
Commissioner Elliott.
All right, it's been moved by Commissioner Vries Daniels and seconded by Commissioner Elliott, and it looks like Mr. Stark has a question or a comment.
Well, I just wanted to comment before the vote was taken, because I suspect that there are some neighbors that are watching this. And I do know that parking has been the #1 concern. In the past, once a development is up and running, when we've discovered that there are parking problems, we have almost always been able to go back and find solutions. One example would be there were issues at, I can't remember the name of the development now, but at the roundabout, at the Cedar roundabout, the new project there with the combined Caribou and Brugger's Bagels, we were able to go back after the fact. And again, it probably took a good 9 months to a year for all the uses to figure out their patterns of how they were entering and exiting, where they parked. And once that all kind of worked through itself, we were able to go back and make some tweaks to some of the requirements there, some of the turning movements, some of the parking. We've been able to do this on other projects as well. In the past, there was at Aldrich and 76th Street, there were parking issues there when that development went in, and we were able to, again, 6 months after the fact, and make some temporary fixes that kind of retrain people, and then those temporary fixes ultimately went away. And so almost every project, it's in staff's best interest. It's in all of the appointed and elected officials' best interest that we don't have parking problems, because quite frankly, if this project were to ultimately have parking problems that couldn't be overcome, I lose all credibility the next time I come back in 6 months or a year with another proposal and we're talking about parking. And so, we will continue to work on this. I can't tell you it's going to be perfect, but I can tell you we will continue to monitor it, and we will look for solutions to real problems. It's hard to find solutions to hypothetical problems, but once the real problems present themselves, we will go back and take a look at the issue.
Thank you. Are there other people that wanted to comment or ask questions before we vote? All right. Thank you, Executive Director Stark, for that comment about the parking, because I do think it is something that we're all concerned about, and make sure we're monitoring that and take care of that. Okay, is there anyone else that wishes to speak? All right, Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez.
I just wanted to say I was excited to see the agreements around labor laws included, and it sounds like this is the first time. So I'm really interested to see how this will move forward, and if that's just a common practice that we can use with every single development. I think it's a great idea. So thank you for adding that.
Thank you. I believe Chair Supple was and other folks, but Chair Supple comes to mind as somebody that was championing this cause. So thanks, all of you.
Yes, thank you for doing that, because I think it's important. Other comments, questions? All right, then Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you please call the vote?
Yes, Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Vries Daniels, and Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
Thank you. We have 5 ayes.
All right, thank you. Next, we're going to move on to consider a resolution approving a preliminary development agreement between the HRA and PLH and Associates Construction Services, LLC, for the redevelopment of property at 101 66th Street East. Thank you. Executive Director Stark.
Thank you, Chair Supple. And I'm going to ask Assistant Director Pillman to provide the staff report.
Thank you. Last month, representatives from PLH and Associates presented updated concepts for their small mixed-use project at 101 66th Street to the HRA and the City Council. The developer is proposing to reduce ground floor retail space in order to provide additional affordable apartment units. Based on feedback received at that meeting, the developer would like to proceed with the development plans and further discussion of potential HRA assistance through the creation of a tax increment financing district. The attached preliminary development agreement provides for the support and cooperation of the HRA as the developer works to develop a feasible project for the site. The agreement provides several benchmarks that must be met, including submitting a financial pro forma, applying for a sketch plan review, and contracting for a blight study of the existing buildings, or the HRA may terminate the agreement. The agreement requires that a development agreement be negotiated by October 20th of this year. The developer is online. I will say that this is fairly standard language for the HRA. It provides a down payment for us to cover legal and financial consultant costs, as well as some modest staff time. And it also provides for us to contract with LHB to conduct that blight study. And that's all.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments that anyone has?
If I may, Commissioner Elliott, do you know, are they reducing the commercial space on the lower level entirely? Or are they going to still have commercial uses there?
As proposed now, the plans that we're seeing, they would keep some commercial space on that ground floor.
Do we know how many square feet they're going to maintain?
We do. If I can find it. Paul Lynch is also on the line. Paul might know it offhand.
Well, it's not a major consideration. I'm just concerned. I'm thinking about, I just remember back when we were reviewing this and it got its approval, that council member Garcia had some concerns about what the commercial space was going to look like. And so I'm just curious, you know, how much it's going to be reduced, and if the concerns she brought up at that point are still going to be considered by the developer.
Right, thank you. I did find that number. The originally approved number was 6,000 square feet. As proposed right now, it's 1,600 square feet. And the unit count would go from 31 to somewhere between 35 and 39 is what it looks like. The concerns that Councilmember Garcia brought up previously are part of the approved PUD. As part of this process, the developer will have to go back and amend that PUD. And so we will be able to look at those conditions again. Most likely they will remain as part of the agreement, unless the council decides as we go through that process that some of those should be modified.
At its 1,500 square feet, the most you could do is maybe 2 service type insurance salespeople, things. I mean, it's not going to create a whole lot of traffic in and out, I guess is what I'm suggesting.
No, it certainly is not.
All right, thank you.
I had a question. Since we're putting in the affordable housing, is this a housing TIF or is this a TIF because you mentioned a blight study? What type of TIF are we looking at?
Thank you, Chair Supple. This would be a redevelopment TIF district. And so in this case, we're looking at a blighted or a substandard property. And as part of that, we go through a process in which it actually has to be certified as meeting those blight standards in order to qualify to create this type of district.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Commissioner Vreese-Daniels?
Just a comment, and then I'm happy that the developer is back and kind of took the feedback and is moving in this direction. So I think it's exciting to see something being built here. It's fantastic.
Any other comments before we have a motion?
make the motion, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Is there a second?
I would second Commissioner Elliott.
Right. So this is a two-part motion. The first is to approve the preliminary development agreement between the Housing and Redevelopment Authority and PLH and Associates Construction Services LLC for the development of property at 101 66th Street East. Second part is to authorize execution of the agreement by the HRA Chair Executive Director. And is there any problem with moving both of those at the same time? Was that your intention, Commissioner Regan Gonzalez?
If that's fine, yes.
All right. And Commissioner Elliott, you're fine with that as well?
Same with the second, correct?
All right, cool. Any other questions? I did want to thank the developer because I know you made some modifications and I know the neighborhood has been looking forward to something happening because it's been sitting empty for quite some time. So I'm glad this is moving forward. Any other questions, comments? If not, Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Reagan Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Vries Daniels,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandal.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, in other business, we are considering the adoption of a resolution approving revisions to the inclusionary affordable housing policy. Executive Director Stark.
Thank you, Chair Supple. I'm going to ask Housing Manager Julie Urban to talk about what is being proposed for changes. Let me just talk a little bit beforehand, though, about why we're proposing it at this point in time. We've had a number of work sessions on this topic, on affordable housing in general, and on the inclusionary housing policy specifically. And late last year, early this year, we as staff heard a handful of things that we thought we heard consensus on. And then we also heard a handful of things for which either there wasn't consensus or everybody believed we probably should get more community engagement around. And that was our intention, to bring this topic out to the community. With the onslaught of the coronavirus pandemic, however, we have not been able to do that. We don't foresee being able to do that for quite some time. We were receiving a little criticism about moving too slowly on some housing issues. So we thought, let's take an incremental step. Let's identify some things that we do believe there is broad consensus around, add those into our inclusionary housing policy as an immediate step, and then we can tackle some of the more controversial issues or issues that don't have as much consensus at a later time when we can bring in the community for more engagement. So what's being proposed tonight is not intended to be the end of the discussion. It's intended to be some progress on things for which there seems to be a great deal of agreement. So with that, I would ask Housing Manager Urban to go through what is being proposed tonight.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. So back in 2018, the city adopted an inclusionary housing policy that requires all new development that receives financial assistance from the city to include affordable housing. Specifically, the policy requires developers receiving a public subsidy to either make at least 20% of the housing units affordable to renters earning less than 60% of the area median income, or owners earning less than 115% of the area median income, or to pledge 15% of the net present value of the subsidy they receive to the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Fund. There were some other items in there as well that we aren't talking about changing or doing anything with, so I won't go into those. But so way back in August of last year, several items were brought up from, I believe it was a couple of council members wanting us to take a look at the policy and relook. And so we discussed 5 things is what we heard come out of that work session. The first was that we wanted to find some way to encourage units with deeper affordability. As you know, that's been an ongoing discussion even this spring with a couple of developments. You know, how can we get deeper affordability? How can we encourage accessible and affordable units? And then we talked about maybe we need to apply the policy to all public land sales, so any property that the HRA owns, regardless of whether it constitutes financial assistance or not. Again, because that is property that's most in our control, and we kind of have the most say about. The fourth item was to consider the cost of requiring that affordable units be spread across a mix of bedroom sizes. And then the fifth was to talk about if this were to be converted to an ordinance, which would then apply to absolutely every development, regardless of whether they receive financial assistance or not. Is that something that we should pursue? If we did pursue that, would that negatively impact development? So those were the 5 things we had heard back in the work session. And you know, it took longer than I had wanted to get some feedback and some numbers from different developers and our financial consultants. And then we ran into work session schedules and finally had it scheduled in March to rediscuss. And then, you know, just it wasn't safe. It isn't safe to have those in-person discussions that we really feel are kind of necessary when it comes to affordable housing. So again, as Director Stark stated, the idea was to maybe be able to move forward on a few of the items that we thought there was consensus for and that don't seem to have a negative impact on development. You know, and now seemed like an appropriate time to do that. We aren't being approached by new developments at this point. We're kind of working through the ones that have been in progress. We are in a time of economic uncertainty, but you know, in a sense, we could be prepared for hopefully when things turn around and we start to hear from folks again, and would be prepared with new items. So I can run through those items. I know Chair Supple and others received some comments that, you know, we shouldn't be moving forward on these things without more public input, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but you know, I can walk through them and then maybe you can decide how you want to do things. We just don't see that anytime soon that we'll be able to do that in a meaningful way. So the first item about encouraging units with deeper affordability, what we did was added a chart, and what that would do, it allows for a lower percentage of units the greater the affordability. So I took a look at the numbers, you know, working with a couple developers, what does it cost to provide units at 60% versus 50% versus 30%? And it's not a perfect match to say 20% at 60, 15 at 50, 10 at 30, but that was kind of a reasonable amount. It does vary quite a bit depending on bedroom size, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that was sort of a way to get at that, you know, if we could get more affordable units, you know, we'd have to accept less in order for that to happen. So I do include a note in your staff report just to remind you that housing TIF districts don't acknowledge this, which is unfortunate. And we started to make a push at the legislature to try to make our case that it'd be nice if the TIF statute allowed that kind of flexibility. And with COVID, none of that legislation was able to move forward. So we'll keep at that, but in the case of a redevelopment TIF district, it might be an option. Or in the case of if we were just selling a piece of property. The second item about accessible housing, we took a look again at numbers and got an estimate from a developer that it costs, you know, between $4,500 and $5,400 to make a type A unit into something that was fully accessible. And we felt as staff that number was reasonable and that could be something we could require. And so what I was suggesting was that we require a minimum of 1% of units in developments that are assisted by the HRA be accessible, fully accessible. And we have been working on that with developers already, talking to them. And as we just heard tonight, the Henley 2 does have one accessible unit as a result of those negotiations. The third item we took a look at was the idea of applying the policy to all property that would be purchased by the city, regardless of sale price. And, I think that's certainly appropriate to do. Something that I would suggest you might consider, though, is we currently apply this policy with a project that has a minimum of 5 units. And I might consider, I would recommend you up that to 20 units, because I think that small projects, it's difficult to get small infill projects. And an example is the roundabout property. 16 units fit on that roundabout property. And I think if we were to require them to do 2 units of affordability, I'm just not sure that would work, and we might not be able to get any kind of development on that property. But that's something you could think about. Let's see, I got off track here. Number 4, the idea of mix of bedroom units. I think what we've concluded, there's this pretty significant cost to go from, say, an efficiency to a 2-bedroom affordable units. And while I know we really strongly want to see some larger affordable units, I think what we have concluded is it requires a lot of resources. And so it's very likely going to have to go through and get outside resources, things like tax credits or other assistance in order to do those larger bedroom sizes. The numbers don't work to get those bedroom sizes. So we would recommend at this point, especially given the economic uncertainty, that we not move forward with that idea at this time. Not that we wouldn't discuss it in the future, but it's just not maybe a good time to be requiring that right now. And then the 5th item about applying it to all developments through an ordinance. Again, we just feel like at this time, given the economic uncertainty, we really ought to hold off on that until we know better how the housing market is going to fare. Are we going to see new development? And so again, those were just the last 2 items were things that, again, not that we can't look at them in the future, but as staff, we think at this, it's not a great time to be pushing forwards on those. So with that, I can take any questions. There were a couple of points that were brought up in the comments that were submitted, questioning the years of affordability, the in lieu fee. Those weren't items that we discussed back at the work session in August, and so that's why they're not part of the discussion. To me, those would be items you'd have to, again, we'd have to hear from these community members what they think and what's important. And again, not something we feel like we can do very well at this point in time.
So we'll have to perhaps talk as a group of what we would like to do. There was quite a groundswell of people once this was on the agenda that came forward with ideas. I know one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet was, if you look at the policy, where is it here? No, I'm not finding it. To number 2 in the policy, where it says non-housing development projects that receive assistance and result in the loss of affordable housing, that they have to replace it. And the concern was brought up, what if someone comes in and they're taking out affordable housing and putting in luxury housing, and you're losing all that affordability housing? And so there were suggestions to just say that a development project that receives assistance would have to replace it. So that's another one that I think people would like to talk about that wasn't brought up. Do others have things they would like to say? I have lots of opinions, but I would like other people to have a chance to speak. Commissioner Regan-Gonzalez.
I just want to say thanks to the staff and the community members that have worked really hard on all of our affordable housing work the past handful of years. It is a very difficult issue that we are all facing in our community. And I wanted to ask, so I understand that COVID will continue to put a barrier in our community engagement overall. And I also don't feel like that issue is going to go away anytime soon. And so I'm wondering, and I also, while this is kind of a time, time is of the essence in some ways, right? Because we've been having this discussion and we have had a couple work sessions on this. I'm wondering, and I'm interested in postponing this item to the next meeting. There's not a time sensitive piece to this, like there are with other permits or other things, and to include a plan of what community engagement would look like, because I just also don't feel comfortable waiting until COVID kind of dies down, because I don't know when that's going to happen and what that's going to mean. So it'd be great if we could kind of discuss that at the next meeting too. What would having the community input in this inclusionary housing work look like moving forward, and postpone the vote and the discussion for next HRA meeting. I don't know what others think.
Chair Supple, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Elliott.
Yeah, I endorse what Commissioner / Mayor Reagan Gonzalez said about having additional input, and I'm loath to interject our opinions on things that haven't really been vetted through staff, and we don't really have background from the community. And whatever happens with COVID and everything, we don't need to visualize the end of it or visualize the economics that are in place at that point in time, but it certainly is going to have an impact on what we may be able to do and what we may be able to leverage our developers into doing. So I think we can, this is aspirational in terms of trying to get more information and have some sense of what the economics are going to look like 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years from now, and how these are going to come into play. So I don't want to put things in place that financially the developers can't do, and we're not in a position to be flexible about it. So I think at least a couple of the things that came off, I think we can make those revisions tonight. We've got the information and we've got the recommendation to staff. The other ones, I'm with the mayor and with you also, Commissioner, to get some additional input from a wide variety of our citizens, so we can try to figure out which ones are really applicable and which ones will really be effective if we put them in place. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Vreese Daniels.
Yeah, so I appreciate staff bringing this forward as like, these are the things that we all agree upon, and let's just kind of agree on them. But I also don't want to be updating this housing policy every month. I think it's worthwhile to take a beat and progress this till our next meeting, when we can kind of get things, get more people involved in conversation.
Executive Director Stark.
Yeah, so we take all these comments to heart. Let's do this. Let's maybe not be fixated on next month's HRA meeting. Let's concentrate on what public engagement could look like and have that be our starting point. And then we will report if one of two things will happen. Either we'll bring this back to you at next month's meeting, or we'll bring back to you a report about how we plan on unveiling this, how we plan on capturing some more input from folks. And so let's just move forward that way.
Commissioner Sandel.
Thank you, Chair Supple. The one thing that you stated was the cost of improving accessibility units. And 4,400 to 5,400 is really within the achievable range, I think. So that's something that would be a high priority for me to see, having a nephew that needs lower countertops, wider doors, all of those kinds of things. So that would be it. And it's not all that expensive, and we've got some money.
Commissioner Reagan Gonzalez.
I really like the suggestion that Development Director Stark shared about bringing something back to us, and I would be in support of just bringing back a plan versus even these specific options and what a plan would look like for engagement. I don't know what the other commissioners think of that.
I would, as an individual, I think having an engagement plan is really important. I'm hesitant to even vote on this tonight because there were a couple of questions in there, like the 10 years duration and some of that I think we need a little more of a discussion on. And I appreciate all the effort that staff took and that they're trying to move this forward. And so I don't want to forget about that. I do appreciate that, but I do think coming up with an engagement plan is important.
I would say though, even without the impact of COVID, if we're going to tackle some of these bigger issues, you know, we were trying to pick some of the low hanging fruit. And if that's, I understand where Commissioner Rees-Daniels comes from, you know, not wanting to piecemeal this. And so if we are looking to come back at this more holistically, that is going to be several months. We're not talking about next month for that. And that's fine. So I think that's what we're hearing from you, and that's instructive to hear, and that's what we'll move forward with.
Are there any additional comments? Commissioner Regan Gonzalez?
Sorry, I'm commenting on this item a lot. Maybe there could just be a couple options for public engagement that are included that to review. One that does have a little more shorter time frame and one that's longer term. I know that this is also an issue that we'll be bringing up in our strategic planning as well, and I'm curious to know how that would fit, how that fits. I think those are kind of separate but related issues, but maybe when you come back, just looking at a couple options for public engagement would be helpful.
One other suggestion is that if we're trying to encourage the public engagement, if we can figure out a way to open up like the open forum, if people could call in for some of those types of things. I know we call in for public hearings, but go ahead, Ms. Urban.
I also would, if you have any ideas or Commissioner Regan Gonzalez, maybe especially in your work, I've been disappointed by what I've heard from other organizations because some of the calling and accessing these meetings for some of our citizens who don't have good internet access or good technology access, you know, and I can do surveys. And anyway, I'm struggling with figuring out how to have it be an inclusive process. I think what I've heard so far is how to run a more effective Zoom meeting. It's like, well, that works for us, you know, for me to facilitate a group of white professionals, forgive my blunt language, but it doesn't help get to all of our citizens. And anyway, so if you have some thoughts or ideas, if you've heard better than I have heard out there, I don't know, that anybody's figured it out, but if you know of someone who has, I'd welcome some ideas.
And to piggyback on that, a big part of what we're trying to do here is not just affordable housing, it's also accessible housing. And to the residents that might be visually impaired, might be hearing impaired, it's just going to be a greater challenge in the current situation than it would have otherwise been. And so we may have to invent some of these methods. You know, Julie and Melissa and I are constantly in Zoom meetings with our peers in other cities, and everybody is struggling mightily with this issue. And so, as I said, we may have to invent something. And to the residents out there that might be watching, we may make some mistakes. So be patient with us.
Thank you for bringing up those issues, because I do think that's very important that we think about all of that and not just, like you said, have Zoom meetings. So Commissioner Sandal?
I had one thought, and that is that I have no problem with having more availability for people to comment and to provide their ideas and input. My one thought is that maybe we can, and I think Mr. Stark mentioned this, maybe we can focus on a couple ideas initially, and maybe we do multiple meetings where we're only focusing on one or two things. The low-lying fruit was his suggestion. Maybe one that's a little more tough than that, and then so that people have a focus, so that otherwise we're going to be all over the map. So that would be my suggestion. And maybe we can get a few things done every 2 months.
Thank you. Other comments? All right. And again, thank you to staff. Thank you to all of the people that emailed and contacted us, and to everybody that's been part of this discussion. And well, if, excuse me, if people have suggestions, if people have suggestions or how we could make it more community engagement and more accessibility and things like that, we would welcome those as well. So with that, I believe we'll be moving on to the next agenda item. And that would be to consider a request to purchase the property at 6701 17th Avenue South for $412,000. Thank you. Executive Director Stark.
Thank you. I'm going to be asking Assistant Director Paleman to provide the staff report. She has been managing this process for probably a year or more, a year and a half. I do have a little longer involvement in this, so I may chime in at some point as well, but I'll turn this over to Melissa.
Thank you. On June 25th of this year, staff was contacted by attorney Craig Greenberg of Huffman, Newsom, Crawford, Greenberg, and Smith, who indicated that he had been hired by the owner of the property located at 6701 17th Avenue to request that the HRA consider a proposal to purchase this property. On behalf of the property owner, Mr. Greenberg has submitted a proposal to the HRA to purchase the property for $412,000. $350,000 for the purchase of the home, and $62,000 in relocation benefits and all closing costs. HRA staff has consulted with the HRA attorney, and we recommend that their HRA reject this proposal. For a little background, in case you don't remember, on October 24th of 2017, the HRA entered into a contract for private development with the Chamberlain Apartments developer related to the construction of a new multifamily development consisting of 283 new apartments and the rehabilitation of 33 existing apartments, as well as the construction of a new public road, which is now Richfield Parkway. The property is located at the corner of 17th Avenue and remaining half block of 67th Street East. Immediately, this property, 6701 17th, is located on the corner of 17th and the remaining half block of 67th Street East, immediately adjacent to the development project area. As part of the development project, the developer attempted to purchase this property. However, the parties were unable to come to an agreement, and the project moved forward without including the property in the project. In 2018, the owner of the property expressed an interest in selling this property to the HRA. HRA staff met with the owner, hired a relocation services company to help her find a home, and ultimately brought before the HRA a proposal to purchase the home for $310,000. This offer was based on valuations by the city's appraiser of $248,000 and the landowner's appraisal of $281,000, plus relocation costs as defined by the Federal Uniform Relocation Act. This is despite the fact that this was a voluntary sale and the HRA would not be required to pay any relocation benefits. On November 19, 2018, the HRA adopted a resolution approving the terms of a purchase agreement for this property at 6701 17th. 6 weeks later, on December 31st, the HRA's offer to purchase the home expired. City and HRA staff continued to meet with the owner after the expiration of the purchase agreement, and in July 2019, hired a mediator to help the parties negotiate. On August 21st, 2019, the mediator informed both parties that she was terminating the mediation process as both parties were at an impasse. On August 29th, 2019, in response to inquiries, HRA Executive Director Stark sent the owner an email stating that there was no pending offer for either the city or the HRA to purchase the property and that neither entity was required to do so. I will add that at the time the HRA made this initial offer to purchase the property, the development was still in early enough stages where the project could have slightly changed to include this end of 67th Street, this dead end that exists there. We could have vacated that road, potentially created some additional buffering, and there was some purpose to purchasing that property and vacating that road. Since then, the project has been completed and a fire hydrant is now installed at the end of 67th Street. To purchase that property now, we would not be able to vacate that road. The project is in place. The buffering, if you have been out there, is substantial. And therefore, based on these facts and the higher purchase price, we are recommending that you reject this offer. John, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it all very well. Thank you.
Before we move on, there was a question in the chat box. Was that referring to the previous item or to this one?
That looks like it was referring to the previous item.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing something here. So in the previous item, we just didn't take action. So
Action was not necessary.
okay, so I just wanted to clear that up before we went on, so we didn't mess something up here. All right, so no action was necessary on the previous item. On this item, are there any questions for Assistant Director Palman? All right, did someone wish to make a motion? Commissioner Sandal?
I don't have the text in front of me, so I don't know. But I guess I would move that we not approve the proposed purchase agreement.
Second, this is Commissioner Elliott.
All right, so you're saying we should reject an offer to purchase property at 6701 17th Avenue South?
Correct.
Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Regan Gonzalez?
I just want to say this is a very unfortunate event, and I appreciate staff's tremendous hours and work in trying to really make this happen, as well as the developer for many years. I don't know how else to say, but unfortunate. And I know that we've tried everything, and we've tried many other approaches and have gone far above and beyond what we've had to really try to make this work for everybody, because obviously we want to support our residents, and we really want to make sure that we do something that is always a win-win for everybody, and it's just not the case. It seems to not be able to happen, and that's unfortunate. I actually did have a question that I thought of after, so sorry about that, but I had a question. So if we deny this, then what happens? Is there like a negotiation, and can they come back with another proposal, or how does what happens next?
Well, in my opinion, back a year and a half ago, we kind of left this in the court of the homeowner. The HRA, had made an offer. The homeowner never formally responded to the offer, never either rejected or accepted it formally. After that point in time, my continuing message to the homeowner was essentially that the ball was in their court if they wanted to make a proposal to the HRA, and it was a reasonable offer, that I, as executive director, would bring it. And that's what we did tonight after the passing of that much time. So I think if the property owner wants to continue making offers, unless you direct me otherwise, I suppose I would bring them back. The city acquires homes for various reasons. We acquire them for potential future development. We acquire them for Richfield rediscussion. I don't think that would be the case here. The only rationale for acquiring this home, in my opinion, would be to land bank it for future development. And for that to work, typically the HRA has to buy it for less than market value. Otherwise, that's a condition that the market would take care of. When I first brought this back to you in December of 2018, there were other public rationale for acquiring it, most notably being able to vacate a half street that was only serving one property, and to avoid all the costs of road maintenance over the years, road plowing. But that opportunity has come and gone. So again, I guess my message to the homeowner at this point would be the HRA's only rationale for buying this would be for land banking, for some future development use at this location, and that we would, for that to make economic sense for the HRA to participate in, that would either have to be market value or below, and that for me to bring something back to you, I'd have to have some evidence of how they arrived at their market value. And so that's where I would leave it.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Mayor Supple, this is Commissioner Elliott, if I may. I just want to tell John that from my perspective, I see no need for staff, elected officials, or the city to apologize. They made an offer that was $30,000 over her own appraised value, and she never even responded to it. So from my perspective, voting this down is appropriate. And if she wants to visit with us, that's fine, but I see no reason to reach out to her anytime in the future. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? All right, then, Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you take the roll, please? Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Regan Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Breeze Daniels,
Aye.
and Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes. Thank you.
Next, we have HRA discussion items. Are there any items that anyone would like to bring up? I'm going to just reiterate thank you to the staff. I know that there's been a lot of projects moving forward and there's a lot of discussion, and we're working on a lot of policy and things, and we do appreciate the openness that you have to all the discussion and all the input from residents of the city and from the Planning Commission and the HRA and the EDA and the City Council. And so we appreciate you. Any other comments? Then we'll move on to the Executive Director's report. Mr.
Well, first of all, I'd like to reciprocate on behalf of myself and the HRA staff. We feel very fortunate to be working with you folks, and we feel very fortunate to be working with the residents of the city of Richfield. It's an absolute pleasure, so thank you. You may have heard that the city of Richfield has been awarded, and I don't ever get the number right, it's either $2.4 million or $2.7 million in federal CARES Act funding. And an allowed use of that funding is for business assistance and for rent assistance, including reimbursing a government entity for rent assistance or business assistance that they have given that was related to COVID. So both the rent assistance that the HRA approved, I think thus far in an amount of around $135,000, and the business assistance that the EDA provided around, sorry, those should be fully reimbursable through CARES Act. We are going to be examining if there are other HRA or EDA costs that would be appropriate for us to either incur internally or to get out to the community that would be COVID related, that we would be able to seek CARES money for. And also, the state has their own pot of CARES money that they receive from the federal government, and VEEP is applying for emergency rent assistance on behalf of Richfield, Bloomington, and Edina to the state pool. And so we are collectively doing all we can to utilize the federal resources. Our hope is to get as much of that money out in the community as we can. So that's my report.
As a follow-up question to that, if that money is reimbursed, does that free that money up again if in the future these needs come up again sometime down the road?
That would. The rent assistance is crystal clear that that's something that we can get reimbursed for. The business assistance, it's a little more complicated because they are loans and not grants. And so we would get reimbursed for everything that was ultimately forgiven. And so, for example, if we gave a forgivable loan of $5,000 to a business and they satisfied all the requirements to have that funding forgiven, then we would be able to get all $5,000 reimbursed from the CARES Act. However, if that same business was only to satisfy half of the requirements for forgiveness, and they ended up having to pay us back $2,500, that repayment, that obviously wouldn't be eligible for the CARES reimbursement.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Are there other questions for Executive Director Stark? All right, the next item on our agenda then are the claims.
So moved.
So I heard Commissioner Elliott move claims, but I don't know if anybody seconded.
I'll second.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the claims. Any discussion? All right, Administrative Assistant Dubois, could you take the roll call on that, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Supple,
Aye.
Commissioner Elliott,
Aye.
Commissioner Reagan Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Vries Daniels,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandel.
Aye.
Thank you. We have 5 ayes.
All right, well, if there's no further business, stand adjourned.